Is this time it? Is it really bye-bye Bibi? Israel's longest-serving prime minister has been written off more times than we can count. And while it seemed that Benjamin Netanyahu's demise may yet be reversed during last month's fighting with Gaza, it's now deadline day for coalition building, and the cards are out of his hands. Netanyahu's former chief of staff, Naftali Bennett, turning on the longtime Likud leader. He's close to a deal that would make him the prime minister first in a sprawling alliance led by the center-right's Yair Lapid, a alliance that would range all the way from Bennett's far right to the pacifist left. Is being anti-Bibi enough for these strange bedfellows to work together? Is Lapid right to concede the prime minister's seat to Bennett for 2 years? And will conservative Arab-Israeli leader Mansour Abbas really play kingmaker in getting the coalition approved by parliament? We'll ask why, as well as what other surprises await as Israel politics enters the final hours of crunch time. Today in the France 24 debate, we're delving into the dark arts of Israeli coalition building. And joining us is attorney and commentator Ron Sofer. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And France 24's Douglas Herbert from our International Affairs Desk. How are you?
Good evening, Francois.
And from Tel Aviv, Alison Summer, journalist at daily newspaper Haaretz. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I've just been reading yet no white smoke, plenty of last-minute horse trading. Yair Lapid, a 57-year-old journalist turned leader of the Yesh Atid party, at the center of all the attention.
Until the formation of the new government, there are still many obstacles. Maybe it's good, because we'll have to get through them together. This is our first test, to see if we can find smart compromises for the big goal in the coming days.
If I understand correctly, Alison Summer, a lot of attention is on a hotel near Tel Aviv, and Lapid has to go in. There's 7 different coalition partners in and out. Is this just standard operating procedure, or is there really this feeling of that this time is different?
Well, it's standard operating procedure in terms that there's a lot of negotiations when it comes to putting a government coalition together. These negotiations tend to go on until the last minute. What's unusual about this round is how many parties are involved in building this coalition. And what's especially unusual is how diverse these parties are. You don't usually see, you've never seen before in Israeli politics, a negotiation that involves trying to come up with coalition guidelines that can accommodate one of the furthest right parties in Israeli politics, the Yamina party, as well as an Islamist Arab party, the Ram party. So that is the difficulty that Yair Lapid is running into as he tries to juggle the competing demands of these parties.
Yeah, let's show our viewers with a graph. If Lapid is able to coerce and cajole the remaining holdouts over the next hours, he'd still be on 57 seats in parliament. The magic number is 61. And here you see, because there's 120 seats in the Knesset, and yeah, possibly playing the role of kingmaker. And I want to bring in Maysam Jaljouli, co-chair of the joint Arab and Jewish advocacy group Sikuyu, the Association for the Advancement of Civic Equality. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a complicated recipe putting together a coalition in Israel, but this time we have this precedent in Mansour Abbas, this conservative Arab Israeli. We don't know yet. I know he's been speaking in the last hour with Yair Lapid. We don't know yet whether he's just going to be supporting the government, whether he's going to be inside of the government. What are you hearing?
He really wants to be in this government. He desperately wants to be in this government because, this is what he promised his voters. And not entering the government for him means that he will end his political road. So Abbas is very willing also to compromise, I think, in order to be in this government. And this is a situation that it's very hard for him and very hard for Ram, the Islamic Party, because the issues of the Palestinian Arab society in Israel is huge issues. And it seems to be that the achievement that he can have from this government is a very low rate achievement. So it will be interesting to see how things will go on in the next few hours till Labid create his government. But actually, Mansour Abbas' future is on a risk right now.
It's at risk right now, and I know it divides Arab Israelis, right? Because you have some from the joint list who don't want to go along with
all the joint list. Till now, the joint list, Hadash, two of the three parties from the joint list actually had declared that they will vote against this government, the change government, because of for us as Palestinians is more far right than Netanyahu. So they already declared that they will vote against. The only one who will, and this is the division because Ram and Mansour Abbas are be right wing in the Arab Palestinian society in Israel, while Hadash and Balad are more leftist, and the leftists will not vote for this government.
Mansour Abbas, let's talk about it with you, Ron. So if they do manage to cobble together this coalition, and Naftali Bennett, former chief of staff of Benjamin Netanyahu from the hard right, is the prime minister, does someone like Mansour Abbas have more in common because of his conservative social views with the right side of that coalition, or not?
Well, it's quite ironic that only a few days ago Israel was accused of becoming an apartheid state, and here it is, government of Israel being supported by an Islamic party, and without the support of this Islamic party, it cannot form a government. One cannot say that this is a great triumph for democracy when a party. When the prime minister is going to be the head of a party that only has 6 seats, and he will head the coalition whose the only thing they can agree about is the fact that they want to unseat the leader of the party that received by far the most votes. It's a very strange coalition. I don't know
got the most votes, but has had 4 snap elections in a row and has not been able to decisively build a coalition.
Yes, but this coalition, I mean, the idea that the prime minister is the head of a party that only has 6 seats in parliament is quite strange. But it's also difficult to see how this government will function and how it will deal with the issues of security. The next time someone from the Hamas decides to fire missiles from Gaza, what will Mansour Abbas do? Will he continue to support this government? It is very, very difficult to see. They may achieve their dream of unseating Prime Minister Netanyahu, but that's about all they're going to achieve, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth just underscoring this would be by far the most unstable government in Israeli history, Israel's modern history, and that whole question of how long it could actually stand, because we have spoken before, just a little over an hour ago, about the fact that one of the things they are going to try to do to sort of create a glue to hold this coalition together and create unnecessary rifts, so to speak, are to concentrate on the issues that perhaps they might be able to find some common ground on, right? What are those? COVID, pandemic, Israel has done a pretty good job right now on the vaccine front. They've shot ahead of most other countries in the world. And the economy, kickstarting, regrowing the economy. You could say, okay, those are areas where even the most ideologically divergent parties might be able to find some common ground, whether we're talking about education policy or health or housing, so on and so forth. But we were saying this earlier. It's true to say that they are going to, in order to keep this government together, this coalition together, to leave the Israeli-Palestinian issues and that whole dispute out of the equation. It's almost, how do you do that? How is that actually feasible and workable in a government, a coalition government in this region at this juncture, where those issues, as we just saw in that recent 11-day war, all came not just to the forefront, but in a whole new way. There's a whole new consciousness around those issues, which hadn't been getting as much airtime, so to speak, and had sort of left the national consciousness in the debate for a few years under the Trump administration, under those years. So back front and center, and yet a coalition government potentially not wanting to concentrate on those issues or really deal with them.
All right, I want to get the reaction of Alison Summer, but first, let's take a look at the man who would go first in leading this coalition. Between 2006 and 2008, Naftali Bennett served as Benjamin Netanyahu's chief of staff. They've since had a cycle of falling outs, reconciliations. Erna Gunke has more on the hardliner, who has only 6 or 7 seats, no matter how you, depending on how you count them, in the Knesset to be the next prime minister.
Naftali Bennett is a multimillionaire and former tech entrepreneur. The son of U.S.-born parents, the former Special Forces commando sold his startup for $145 million in 2005 and ventured into politics and the Likud party the following year. He served as Benjamin Netanyahu's chief of staff until 2008. And though he later broke away from Likud, he served as Minister of Defense, Education, and Economy under various Netanyahu governments, despite their strained relations. Bennett rose to the head of the nationalist religious party Yamina in 2020 and has since made no secret of his desire to become the Israeli right's new leading figure. Unlike some of his ultra-conservative allies, Bennett holds a relatively liberal stance on gay rights and secularism. An advocate of liberalizing the economy, he's pushed for cutting red tape and taxes. But expanding settlements and annexing much of the occupied West Bank have arguably been at the center of his political platform.
I believe I'm the only one, and our party is the only party on this podium that opposes founding a Palestinian state within the land of Israel, between the Jordan and the Mediterranean.
But building a viable anti-Netanyahu government could force Naftali Bennett to water down some of his most ideological views, at least for the time being. Though he long refused to work with centrist Yair Lapid, in late May he reversed his stance in what he described as the most complex decision he's made in his life. Should the two successfully unite, Naftali Bennett would lead the government first as prime minister and later give way to Yair Lapid in a rotation agreement.
So, Alison Summer, perhaps you can answer the question put by Ron Sofer earlier. What does happen the first time there's a rocket attack from Gaza inside of this coalition?
Well, I mean, presumably this is something they're going to have to discuss ahead of time and not have to, make it up in the moment. But the policy issue that is the most, I think, incendiary is that of settlements and the fate of the West Bank. And in that, I think that there is an agreement, not to go forward and not to go backward, not to move in any way towards any kind of compromise or peace agreement or signs of giving up any of the West Bank. And on the other hand, no expansion of settlements. That's actually a reason that some very right-wing settlers are now demonstrating in front of the hotel where the coalition negotiations are happening, because a rumor is spreading that there's going to be a promise by the right, by Naftali Bennett's party, to a settlement freeze, which they're very opposed to. The sticking point right now, there are 3 parties who have not signed the coalition agreement, and that's the New Hope Party, Naftali Bennett's right-wing party, and Mansour Abbas's party. And these last sticking points are over national Israeli-Palestinian issues. Mansour Abbas is not agreeing to go into the coalition unless there's a commitment from this new government to reverse a law that would allow the legalization of Bedouin towns in the Negev.
Oh, we seem to have lost the connection there for a second with Tel Aviv. We're going to try to reconnect as quickly as possible. Maysam Jaljouli, your thoughts on What's in it for the left beyond getting rid of Benjamin Netanyahu, going into government with the likes of Naftali Bennett?
I just want to comment on what Sofer had said before about the issue of apartheid or not apartheid. Let's not, confuse between things, and let's not mix between other issues. The Islamic Party is a part of Israel. The Palestinian citizens of Israel are all the years are part of the political game in Israel. So let's talk about what happened inside Israel and not talk about the occupation, because yes, there is an apartheid policy occupied territories, and there is a lot of discrimination, a national discrimination against Palestinians in Israel, but it doesn't mean that we as Palestinians, we are not planning to share power. We are not planning to be influential in the politics. And I think that Ra'am, and before that also the Joint List, had tried to influence from the inside. And I think this is a huge development that we are having. And unfortunately, if we talk about the left wing, I think that the left wing is very, very weak. The left wing is actually, they didn't have a clear policy over the last decades. And it seems to be that the one who really rule Israel, not only by the government, but ideologically, is the right wing. And so the left wing was shrinking all the time. And I think that this government is opportunity for the left wing to rethink about its values, to rethink about building a real shared society and a real shared cooperation, not only with the political parties inside the Arab-Palestinian society, but in the whole civic issues.
When we come back, we're going to look at some of the other challenges ahead and whether or not we have seen the last of Benjamin Netanyahu. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're counting down to what may or may not be the end of Israel's longest-serving prime minister's 12-year continuous reign. With us to talk about the crunch time in Israel for building an anti-Bibi coalition from Tel Aviv, Alison Summer, journalist at daily newspaper Haaretz, from the central Israeli city of Tira, Maysam Jaljuji, co-chair of the joint Arab and Jewish advocacy group Sikuyu, the Association for the Advancement of Civic Equality. Attorney and commentator Ron Sofer is with us, as is France 24's Douglas Herbert. Before agreeing on a government, parliamentarians in the Knesset did agree on something earlier in the day: a new president. Labor's Yitzhak Herzog, he's the sign of a political dynasty, winning by a landslide in the first round. The Knesset voting by secret ballot there. Alison Summer, he obviously got votes from the right, even though he's from the Labor Party. What's that about?
Well, Herzog is, the closest thing that Israel has to, I guess, if you're British, the royal family, or if you're American, the Kennedys, and that his grandfather was chief rabbi of Israel. His father was president of Israel. Before that, he was Israel's representative at the United Nations. Herzog, for a long time, led the Labor Party. He kind of climbed the ladder and was a minister there. So he's been around literally since he was a child, and he has long-standing relationships. Since he left the political arena in 2018, he's been head of the Jewish Agency, sort of the quasi-governmental organization that reaches out to diaspora Jews. And so there have been a lot of photo opportunities welcoming new immigrants to Israel from around the world. So he's had a lot of years and a lot of time to spread a lot of goodwill and have positive relationships. And he's been going along this campaign very calmly and methodically. It's been like the polar opposite of what's happening in mainstream Israeli politics. It's been sort of as no drama and calm and positive campaigning and positive messaging as the actual political arena of Israel has been messy and sniping and hard and tough. And he was a popular guy, and he swept this election, and he is now going to hold the office that his father held. He's going to be sitting in the presidential mansion, which is largely an honorific position, kind of a diplomatic, representational, royal, if you will, position, with two major exceptions. One is the ability to call the shots when it comes to putting together a coalition in an election, which, as we know these days, is a very important role, given that there have been so many elections. And the second, which will be very important to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's on trial for corruption charges, the president has the ability to pardon. And so Netanyahu is going to be very friendly with Herzog, one imagines, in the near future, presuming if he is convicted on the corruption charges for which he's standing trial, that he will be in line for a presidential pardon.
Ron Sofer, cynics, and yes, there are cynics in Israel. So they say the calculus on the part of Likud is that if you're going to be asking for a pardon eventually, it's easier to do it if the president is not from your party.
Well, during this time of political crisis, the press has not been really following the trial of Netanyahu, but I have, and if you do follow it, you can see that one of the prosecution's main witnesses is being completely decimated in the cross-examination by Netanyahu's lawyers.
So you think he's
the
going to
accusation against corruption is tenuous, and after seeing this witness completely disintegrate, I'm not sure that Netanyahu. I'm confident that Netanyahu will probably be exonerated. It is difficult not to make the comparison between what's happening with Netanyahu today and what happened to Winston Churchill right after World War II, when he lost the election, and was.
You're comparing Netanyahu to Churchill
because Netanyahu just finished vaccinating the entire population. He had a successful period in economics. The Israeli economy is doing extremely well. He's been one of the most competent prime minister that Israel has ever had. And he's being kicked out, or I don't know whether it will happen, by a coalition who the only thing that they can agree about is the fact that they want to unseat him.
Has he been around for? I mean, has he been around for too long? I mean, he's been. His first stint as prime minister is more than a quarter century ago.
But after 4 elections, his party is still getting more votes by far than any other party, and the Israelis are voting for him, even though he's been indicted, even though he's standing for trial.
Let me bring in my Sam Jaljuji here, because what's interesting is we're seeing in this last-minute horse trading to build a new coalition. One of the people that's been at the focus of attention is the former justice minister, close to Naftali Bennett, Ayelet Shaked. She's a hardliner. And that's because there's bargaining over who gets to sit on the Judiciary Committee in Parliament that picks judges. Do you feel as though the judiciary and its is part of what's at stake in this last-minute bargaining?
Yeah, I think that this is an issue, I can tell it's an issue for the Jewish population in Israel. me as a Palestinian Israeli citizen, I think that the justice system had never been supporting us as a minority. So sometimes when I hear, the discussion or about this issue, I say, okay, for me as a Palestinian, I never felt, the justice in the justice system in Israel. For 73 years, we all the time also suffered from this justice system. So I think that for Palestinian Israeli citizens, this issue is not the issue. But the issue is, the getting rid of Netanyahu. I think it's very important for us also because the Netanyahu period was a very bad one for us. The incitement, the hatless speech of Netanyahu and Netanyahu government all over these years, and the laws, especially the nation-state law that really says actually that there are people who are first-level people, and they are superior and inferior.
That's
And
not
the
what the law
superior are
says.
the
That's
Jewish
completely
people,
false.
and the
It's not
inferior
what the
are
law
the
says.
Arab citizens. This is what the law says.
No,
And
that's
this
not
is,
what the law says. All the law says is that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. So you're putting into it something it doesn't say.
And this law is a law from the Netanyahu period, because and when you think about it, I think
Well,
maybe
Naftali
we will
Bennett
get
voted for it.
We will get Bennett,
And so did
and
the-
Bennett
one
is
at
a
a time,
right
one at a
wing.
time.
Please let me continue, please. I'm not hearing you also, so let me continue. Naftali Bennett, yes, is a right wing. He is not better than Netanyahu of these issues. But I think that this is a transitional government. The government will maybe be functioning for a year or year and a half. And I hope that in this year and a half, we can do something to change the political sphere and also to get rid of Bennett.
All right, the Benjamin Netanyahu, not gone yet, splashed across the front page of Alison Summers' newspaper Haaretz this Wednesday, is journalist Yossi Werter's warning that Netanyahu won't go quietly. He didn't compare him to Winston Churchill, but rather to Donald Trump, saying Israel's January 6th is approaching. It might well happen on June 8th or 9th when the Knesset meets to vote on the new government. Alison, do you really think that Netanyahu will try something out of the ordinary, akin to Donald Trump's supporters storming the Capitol?
Netanyahu never stops trying. Listen, there are some who blamed him for inciting parts of the right on the eve of Yitzhak Rabin's assassination. I'm not saying he was blamed for the assassination, but his rhetoric was linked to it. But it is a very important point to note that even if the white smoke comes out of the Kfar Maccabea hotel tonight and everyone signs on the dotted line of the coalition, it's going to be 12 days before that coalition is sworn into office. And those are 12 days that Netanyahu could try anything, from his record, more likely of some sort of political sabotage, challenging the coalition on various grounds in the legal courts. But yes, his supporters can also hold large demonstrations, and one hopes that they wouldn't turn violent. But anything can happen in Israeli politics, and there has been increased security on Naftali Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, the members of this Yamina party who have been branded as traitors and turncoats by the right for going into this coalition with left-wing parties, and also members of the left have also received a lot of threats. And I believe one of the left-wing leaders, Tamar Zandberg from the Meretz party, has left her home after her child was threatened. So it is a very sort of scary and dangerous atmosphere on the eve of the formation of this new government coalition.
All right, time running short, so I want to talk a little bit, Douglas Herbert, about how this is playing out. Again, you mentioned it in part one of our discussion.
Yeah.
After those 11 days of fighting we saw last month, the worst in years, where the U.S. didn't want to get involved,
Right.
Got drawn into it. We then had the visit of the new Secretary of State, to the region. On Thursday, the outgoing defense minister, who's going to be possibly then staying in his post, Benny Gantz, former rival of Netanyahu, or current rival, depending on how you look at it, he is going to be in Washington. Why is he going to be in Washington when it's all happening in Israel?
Well, okay, on the surface of it, if you pour through the Israeli press today, he's there really on a mission. He's going to be presenting the so-called softer face of the administration. He is going to remain as defense minister in this coalition. He is not, we've said before, he's not the un-Netanyahu, but what he has been is a sort of more moderate or mild face of Israel. He will be there, for one, looking for money. How much money? About $1 billion he wants to get from the Pentagon. For what? To replenish the supply of missiles for the Iron Dome. We know that Israel used a lot of those missiles to basically repel incoming rockets from Hamas. It's not a bottomless pit. You need to replenish them. So he's part of the mission is a little bit cap in hand. He's going to try to at least project confidence that it's something that would sail through Congress approval-wise. Also, the Iran deal right now is being hammered out, the final stages as being reported in Vienna, a deal which could see the United States rejoining the 2015 accord, an accord from which, as we know, Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the United States in 2018. There may be also, I said, the softer face of the Israeli coalition. Netanyahu said a few days ago that given the choice between antagonizing a bit the United States and creating friction in the U.S. relationship with Israel, or ensuring that Israel, as he sees it, is protected from a rearmed Iran, he'll choose the latter. That's typical quintessential Netanyahu. Benny Gantz is going to be trying to sort of airbrush that, to try to moderate that rhetoric, to try to reassure Washington.
What do you make of the timing, Ron Sofer? Why now? What kind of a mandate does he have as defense minister going over there while there's this?
Well, I at first would like to say that the idea that if a new government is sworn in, that Netanyahu will not transfer power peacefully is beyond absurd. But I think that it's important to note that yesterday Netanyahu announced that Israel needs to fight against this Iran deal, even at the risk of getting into a conflict with the United States. And
so that's why Benny Gantz went to Washington?
Maybe, but I think that the main reason is because, as Douglas said, it is absolutely essential that the missiles be replaced.
Alison Summer, why now? I mean, it's a strange timing.
I would, theorize, and again, I don't have the reporting on this, that it has to do with the Iran deal and the proposed return to the JCPOA, the Iran deal by the United States. There have been some reports on that I've seen coming out of the EU and the Europeans that the ground is being prepared for the return of the U.S. to the deal. So I would imagine that has a lot to do with the timing. If the U.S. is moving quickly towards returning to the Iran deal, trying to convince them not to, or trying to influence them on the terms of the deal, can't be put on hold just because Israel's in the middle of a political crisis. So it would explain Gantz making his way there, especially since he is the defense minister now, and he is going to be the defense minister even if there is a change government and a change coalition. So that's going to be a top concern for him, no matter what happens on the political front.
I was just going to add one more sort of element. It's more peripheral on the U.S. domestic politics front, but we talked a lot about how this so-called recalibration of U.S. foreign policy in the region, which we saw during the 11-day war recently, where Biden came under a lot of pressure, especially from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, to inject what has been referred to as a language of equality into the relationship, the traditional sort of shibboleth, if you will, in the U.S.-Israel relationship, thou shalt not criticize Israel. Israel's a staunch ally of the U.S. You don't criticize it. You stand by. You have Israel's back. And Biden did reiterate that. He is more than ever sort of the archetype of the traditional U.S. policy towards Israel. Like I said, the pressure from the more progressive wing, but not just the progressive wing, also more moderate Democrats, now basically saying it's hypocritical for Joe Biden and others in his administration to preach a sort of a racial justice equality message at home with the Black Lives Matter movement, so on and so forth, and then get onto the political stage, especially with policy in the Mideast region, and all but sort of let that all fall by the wayside. When it comes to Palestinian rights, they don't talk the same talk, this is what the critics would say, as they do with the Black Lives Matter movement. So there might also be in this Benny Gantz mission sort of a little pushback from Israel to try to get that bipartisanship, to try to re-inject that sort of traditional relationship back into the
Maysam Jaljouli, we saw during those 11 days of fighting last month the most successful general strike by Palestinians in a long time. It was in Gaza, it was in the West Bank, and it was also inside of Israel. And your thoughts in the context of that about whether or not the U.S. is recalibrating, what does it change for Arab Israelis and for Palestinians more broadly?
I think, let's say that I think that the one who can change the reality in Israel is Israelis and Palestinians. And actually, I think that, pressure from the United States, yes, will help, but the one who needs to do the change and to make the change is us. The responsibility is our responsibility. And I think as Palestinian inside Israel, I think that we can have a major role in maintaining also the peace process between Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and Israelis. And yet this is the role that we didn't play yet. And I think that it's time to play this role. Actually, the demonstration that was held shows us that the people who said that Palestinians will forget their nationality and they will forget their Palestinian identity has failed. This strike showed us that Palestinian people everywhere are the same people. And also me as Palestinian Israeli citizens, I say, and my main goal is ending the occupation and establishing a Palestinian state. And if the United States will play the role that it should play, and the whole international community will play the role, it will help us. It will help us to really pressure the governments of Israel to start a peace negotiations.
Ron, so let me begin Ron Sofer, because we're short on time here. Ron, the fact that the U.S. has been drawn back into what it didn't want to put this at the top of its agenda, but with what happened last month, the Biden administration drawn back in, sending Antony Blinken. Is that a good thing?
Yes, the United States supported Israel during this short war in Gaza. Yesterday, there was a visit by a congressional delegation in Israel. I think it is important to note, I just want to go back to one thing that was said that's very important. One of the sticking points in the coalition that's being formed is who's going to get to appoint justices of the Supreme Court, because there are 3 appointments that are up for grabs. And contrary to what was said, the justices of the Supreme Court are extremely important, because some of the Arab representatives in the Knesset have been reinstated by the courts after they've been after the Electoral Commission refused to accept their candidacy. So the courts are very important, and the subject of who's going to get to appoint justices in the Supreme Court is crucial in current Israeli politics. All right. Just like it is in the United States.
And it's certainly been proving one of the key sticking points as we count down, and we continue to count down, and will count down until that midnight deadline Israeli time for Yair Lapid to form his coalition with Naftali Bennett at the helm. Thank you, Alison Summer, for joining us from Tel Aviv. Maysam Jaljouli from Tira, Ron Sofer, Douglas Herbert. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.